the face that launched 1,000 ships, Helen of Troy's forbidden love. For one woman, kingdoms burned, for one love, thousands died, and for one choice, history itself was changed forever. I remember the night as if it were carved into the marrow of my bones, the sea. Stretched black and endless, its surface rippling like dark silk beneath the moon, the wind carried the sharp scent of salt and far-off rain, and the timbers of my ship groaned softly, as though they, too, knew we were about to commit an act that would echo through the ages, from the cliffs of Sparta. I had first seen her, Helen, the woman the poets had already begun to whisper about in taverns and courts. They said her beauty was a gift from the gods, but when my eyes found her, I knew it was a curse as well. She stood in the courtyard bathed in lamplight, speaking with her attendants, unaware, or perhaps entirely aware, of how the very air bent around her presence. Her beauty wasn't simply in the curve of her face or the glow of her skin, it was in the way she seemed to bend the will of men without a word, the way she made the world slow to a heartbeat's pace when she entered it. They will tell you I stole her, others will swear she came willingly. Her heart already mine long before my ship's prow cut through the waters to reach Spartan shores. The truth? The truth is slippery, like the wind. You can feel it, but you can't hold it. Perhaps I seduced her, perhaps she seduced me, or perhaps, from the moment our eyes met, we both became prisoners of something far greater than ourselves. That night, the torches along the harbor flickered as we slipped away, the sails caught the wind, white ghosts in the darkness, and the oars beat a steady rhythm like the pulse of fate itself. Behind us, Sparta lay sleeping, for now, but in the stillness I could already feel it, the first stirrings of outrage, the whispers of betrayal curling through the palace halls. By sunrise, Menelaus would know. By sunset, the message would ride on fast horses to every corner of Greece. I did not think then, or perhaps I did, but refused to care, that this journey would awaken the wrath of 1,000 oaths. It would call kings from their thrones, unite rivals who had sworn never to fight side by side, and set fire to a city whose walls had never known defeat. I tell you now, this is not just Helen's story, this is mine. This is the story of how a single night, a single choice, turned love into the greatest war the world had ever seen. For Helen, there was a world I understood, a world of boundaries, alliances, and grudges that kept the balance between peace and war. Sparta stood proud in the south, a kingdom of warriors and order. Troy, my home, glittered on the far side of the Aegean, rich from trade, its walls rising like a crown above the sea. Between us stretched leagues of water, and the unspoken understanding that each land would guard its own, that kings would respect the oaths that bound them, but the gods Menelaus welcomed me as a guest. I was shown the halls of his palace. The train I stepped into a store. Days that followed were wrapped in a haze of golden afternoons and quiet conversations. Sparta's courtyards were alive with the fragrance of olive trees and the distant clink of bronze from the training fields. I moved among Menelaus's court as an honored guest, but my thoughts were never far from Helen. Every glance she cast seemed weighted with something unspoken, and each time our eyes met across the feasting hall, I felt the air tighten between us. She was unlike any woman I had known. Not just for her beauty, which was the kind poets fail to capture, but for her mind. Helen spoke with a wit that could unsettle even the most seasoned warrior. She could recite the lineage of every Greek king and debate the nature of the gods with the precision of a philosopher, and yet, beneath it all, there was an ache in her voice when she spoke of her life in Sparta. It was the tone of someone who had everything, except the thing she truly wanted. Menelaus, proud in his role as king, was often absent, tending to affairs of state, overseeing his warriors, or hunting in the hills. In those hours, the palace felt softer, less guarded. Helen would walk the gardens with her attendants, and I would find myself happening to be there. We spoke at first of harmless things, the weather, the festivals in Troy, the shape of the clouds over the Aegean, but the words began to slip into deeper waters. She asked me of my childhood, and I told her of Mount Ida, of tending sheep in the shadow of Troy's walls. Unaware I was a prince, I told her of the gods' strange visit, of the golden apple, though I left unsaid the promise Aphrodite had made, and she told me of her youth, of being courted by kings, of the oath of Tyndareus, of how her father had feared war would come from her beauty. She spoke of how Menelaus had been chosen not because she loved him, but because the other suitors swore to defend him should anyone try to take her away. We both knew, though neither dared speak it aloud, that there was a wall between us, but the wall was not stone. It was air, fragile and invisible, and day by day, it thinned. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Helen stood at the balcony of her chamber, watching the sea. The wind played with her hair, lifting strands that caught the dying light like threads of gold. I approached without a sound, but she did not turn. Instead, she spoke softly, her words carried away almost before I could hear them. Do you believe the gods rule our hearts, Paris? Or do we choose who we love? It was a dangerous question, and I felt its weight. I could have answered as a diplomat, as a guest in another king's home, but I answered as the man I was, one already ensnared. I think I said that the gods plant the seed, but we decide whether to let it grow. She turned then, her gaze steady, unflinching. The silence between us was thick with everything we could not say, and yet in that silence, I knew she understood my meaning. From that night, there was no pretense. We moved through the palace as two actors in a play the audience could not yet see, our words measured, our glances quick and charged. My heart raced each time she entered the hall, each time her hand brushed mine as we passed in the garden. It was Aphrodite herself who gave us our moment. Menelaus received urgent word from Crete, a death in the royal family that required his presence. He left with a retinue of men, trusting his guest, the Trojan prince, to enjoy Spartan hospitality until his return. When the ships had vanished beyond the horizon, the palace seemed to exhale that night. Helen came to me. She wore a simple white robe, her hair unbound, her face lit only by the flicker of oil lamps. She said nothing at first. She simply looked at me as though memorizing my face, committing it to some place in her heart she knew she could never erase. If I go with you, she said finally, there will be no return. Men will die for this. Cities will burn. My name will be cursed in every tongue. I stepped closer, my voice low but certain. And yet, you ask if you should come. Her lips trembled, But her eyes did not waver, because I must know if what I feel is worth the ruin it will bring. I took her hands, feeling the slight tremor in her fingers. It is worth everything, I told her, and in that moment, the choice was made, though whether it was hers, mine, or the gods, I cannot say. We planned our flight in whispers over the next 2 days. A merchant ship from Troy had anchored in the harbor, its captain a loyal servant to my family, under the cover of night. We would slip away, taking only what we could carry. On the final night, the air was thick with the scent of the sea. We met in the shadow of the palace walls, cloaks drawn over our heads. The ship waited in silence, its sails furled, its crew motionless as statues. My heart pounded in my chest as we crossed the moonlit shore, each step a drumbeat toward the unknown. When we reached the deck, I helped her aboard. For a moment, she stood there, looking back at the dark outline of Sparta against the horizon. I saw her jaw tighten, her breath catch. Perhaps she thought of the life she was leaving, the safety, the crown, the world that had been hers. Or perhaps she thought of the blood that would be spilled because of us. Then she turned to me, and whatever doubt had flickered in her eyes was gone. The captain gave the signal, and the sails unfurled with a whisper. Like a giant exhaling, the wind caught them, pulling us into the black expanse of the Aegean. Behind us, Sparta slept. Ahead lay Troy, and a future neither of us could truly imagine. But even as we sailed, I could feel the shadow of what was to come. By sunrise, Menelaus would return. He would find her gone, his honor torn from him like flesh from bone. He would call upon the oath sworn by her suitors, an oath that bound the greatest kings and warriors of Greece to fight for her return. And they would come, Agamemnon, the high king, with his armada, Odysseus, cunning as the sea itself, Achilles, the spear that could not be stopped. They would gather beneath their banners, and the wind that carried us now would one day carry their ships to Troy's shores. I tell you this not as a man seeking to justify what I did, but as one who knows how stories twist and change in the malice of others. They will call me a thief, a coward, a bringer of ruin. They will call her a harlot, a traitor, the curse of men. But in those first nights at sea, as the moonlight danced across the water and Helen sat beside me, her hair tangling in the breeze, none of that mattered. We spoke of the life we would have in Troy, of the markets we would walk, the feasts we would share, the garden she would tend. She asked about my brothers, my father, the great walls that guarded our city. I told her of Priam's wisdom, of Hector's honor, of the towers that caught the dawn before any other in the land. I promised her safety, though deep down, I knew the world does not grant such gifts freely. Still, in those hours, I let myself believe it was possible that love could exist without the stain of war, that we could shape our own fate beyond the reach of the gods. But the gods are never so easily denied. Their hands were already upon the threads of our lives, weaving a tapestry we could not yet see. And when the first gulls cried above the mast at dawn, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. For love, I had taken Helen from her home. For love, I had defied the oath of kings. And for love, I would see Troy stand against all of Greece, what I did. Not yet know, was that love would not be enough to save us. P of masts and hulls, hundreds of them, moving as one, their sails dark as storm clouds. The council met again, urgency sharp in every voice. This time, there was no debate about whether war would come. It was already here, rolling toward us on the tide. Hector stood at the center of the hall, issuing orders with the calm authority of a man who had already accepted his fate. I watched him, feeling both pride and the gnawing weight of knowing that my choices had placed him here. That night, the city did not sleep. The clang of hammers, the murmur of priests offering sacrifices to the gods, the quiet sobs of those who feared they would lose sons, husbands, and brothers, all these sounds wove into a single, restless hum beneath the stars. Helen and I stood on the balcony of our chamber, looking out toward the dark horizon. They will come for me, she said. Softly, her voice carrying no fear, only certainty. I took her hand, my fingers closing over hers. Then they will have to take you from my dead hands. She looked at me then, a shadow of sadness in her eyes. I fear they might. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and smoke. And in that moment, I knew the world we had built in stolen glances and moonlit promises was about to be tested in the forge of war, and that nothing, not even love, might survive the fire. The first weeks of the war were not like the poets would later sing. There were no endless clashing of spears at the gates, no constant storms of arrows raining down from the walls. Instead, it was a strange, heavy stillness, like the air before a storm. The Greek fleet had landed on the beaches beyond the Scamander River, their camp a forest of black masts and fluttering banners. From the towers of Troy, I could see them, specks of bronze and leather in the sunlight, moving like ants as they raised their pavilions. They did not rush to attack. The Greeks were patient, and they had come prepared to starve us out if need be. They sent out raiding parties to the surrounding countryside, burning fields, seizing livestock, cutting off supplies to the city. In the mornings, the smoke of distant farms rose like thin black fingers into the sky. I knew some of the villages they struck. I had ridden through them as a boy, accepted their offerings as a prince. Now they were ash and silence. Inside the walls, life continued, but with an edge to it. The market still bustled, the temple still filled with offerings, but the laughter was quieter, the music more solemn. Every day, men trained in the courtyards and along the battlements, their armor clattering like the heartbeat of the city. Women carried water, tended the wounded from skirmishes, whispered prayers to gods whose favor we desperately needed. Helen walked among them, her beauty undimmed, but her gaze sharper now, as though she, too, felt the weight of the city's fate resting on her shoulders. Some looked at her with awe, others with quiet resentment. I heard the whispers when they thought I could not. She is the reason the Greeks are here. I wanted to defend her, to shout that she had not asked for this war, that love had not been her crime. But the truth was not so simple. Hector bore the burden with the grace of a leader born to his duty. He met each council with calm resolve, planned each defense with care. When he rode out with his chariot to meet the enemy in battle, the people cheered him as the shield of Troy. He returned each to the field and singered at Sparta. She killed all answer. All through the over me like a shadow. The war had only begun, and it would not end until it consumed us all. The years bled into one another, the seasons marked not by harvest or festival, but by the waxing and waning of the war. I watched Troy change, the laughter in the streets faded. Children grew up, knowing nothing but the sound of distant battle. The fields beyond the walls were no longer green, but scarred and blackened, the bones of men and horses hidden beneath the soil. The Greeks, relentless in their siege, sought new ways to break us. Raids became more daring, night assaults launched in the dark hours before dawn. Our allies came and went, some falling in battle, others abandoning the cause when the tide turned against them. Still, Hector held the line. My brother was the beating heart of our defense, a shield that stood between Troy and ruin. Every time he rode out, I feared it would be the last I saw of him. Helen moved through the palace like a phantom of beauty, untouched yet burdened by the suffering her presence had brought. She never spoke of returning to Sparta, though I often wondered if the thought haunted her in secret. At times, I would catch her staring toward the Greek camp from the walls, her expression unreadable. I never asked what she saw. The turning point came not with an army, but with a man, Achilles. The Greeks had always had their champions, but Achilles was different. He was like a storm given human form, his rage and skill unmatched on the battlefield. Wherever he fought, the ground seemed to drink more blood, and the Greeks pushed us back inch by inch. No spear could pierce him, no sword could slow him. So the stories went, and his very presence filled our warriors with dread. But even a storm can be silenced, and it was my arrow that did it. It happened after Achilles had slain Hector. I can still see it, my brother's body dragged behind a chariot, the dust rising in choking clouds, the cries of Troy breaking like waves against the walls. That day, grief drowned the city. Priam himself, aged and broken, went to the Greek camp to beg for Hector's body, and by some miracle, he returned with it. We burned him on a pyre high as the gates, and the smoke carried his spirit toward the gods. I could not let it end there. I could not let Hector's death go unanswered. On the day of Achilles' final battle, I climbed the towers with my bow in hand. From the parapets, I watched him cut through our warriors, his armor blazing in the sun. The gods whispered in my ear, or perhaps it was only the wind, and my fingers drew the bowstring back. The arrow flew, swift and silent, guided to the one place no armor guarded. His heel. Achilles fell, the roar of battle faltering for a heartbeat. The Greek surged to protect his body, but the damage was done. The unkillable had been slain by the man they called a coward. The victory was hollow. The war did not end. If anything, it hardened the Greeks' resolve. Without Achilles, they turned to cunning, to deception. That was when Odysseus' mind began to shape the plan that would destroy us. It began with a retreat, or so it seemed. One morning, we woke to find the Greek camp empty, the ships gone from the shore. Only a massive wooden horse stood on the sand, its head high, its body hollow. Some said it was an offering to Athena, a token of surrender. Others, like Cassandra, cried out that it was a trap, that death waited within, but her warnings had been ignored too many times before. The gates were opened, the horse brought inside as a trophy. That night, Troy celebrated as it had not in years. The wine flowed, the music rose, and for a few hours, the city forgot the weight of war. Helen sat beside me in the great hall, her smile faint, her eyes distant. At one point, she leaned close and whispered, "Paris, something is wrong." But the sound of laughter and song drowned her words. I awoke to the smell of smoke. Shouts echoed through the corridors, the clash of steel ringing from every street. The Greeks had returned, not from the sea, but from within. The horse had hidden their best warriors, who slipped out under cover of night to open the gates for the rest. I ran to the battlements. Fire devoured the city. Greek soldiers poured through the gates, cutting down anyone in their path. The air was thick with the stench of burning wood and blood. I fought my way through the chaos, calling for Helen, my bow in hand. The streets I had known since childhood were unrecognizable, filled with bodies, the stones slick beneath my feet. I found her at last in the temple of Athena, her back to the cold marble altar, her eyes wide but steady. A Greek soldier lay at her feet, his lifeblood pooling on the floor. She did not speak as I reached for her hand. Together, we fled through the narrow alleys, the heat of the fires licking at our skin, but there was no escape. Troy was dying. The walls that had stood for generations crumbled under the weight of betrayal and flame. My people screamed in the streets, the voices of the old and young rising together in a final, desperate chorus. We reached the harbor as the dawn broke, the sky choked with smoke. The sea, once a promise of freedom, now reflected only the ruin behind us. I turned to Helen, my chest heaving, my hands trembling. "This is the end," I said. She looked back at the burning city, then at me. "No," she said softly. "This is only the end of our beginning, and in that moment I understood we might live, but we would never be free of this war. It would follow us, whisper our names as curses in the mouths of strangers, stain every step we took with the memory of what we had done. I pulled her into the boat waiting at the shore, and as the oars bit into the water, Troy, my home, my heart, vanished behind us in a shroud of fire. We sailed until the sea swallowed the last ember of Troy's burning towers. The air was heavy with the scent of smoke, even far from shore, as if the city's final breath had followed us into exile. I sat at the prow, my bow across my knees, watching the waves break and reform, each one a fleeting shape that vanished before my eyes. Like everything I had ever loved in that city, Helen sat beside me in silence, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed not on the horizon, but somewhere beyond it. In the golden light of morning, she looked untouched by the ruin we had left behind, and yet there was something in her eyes, a weight no crown could carry. Neither of us spoke for hours. What words could bridge the gulf between love and loss? I wanted to tell her that I would do it all again, that I would cross the same sea, face the same armies, burn the same bridges just to sit beside her now. But the wind stole the words before they reached my lips, and perhaps it was better that way. When at last she turned to me, her voice was quiet, steady. "They will tell our story, Paris, but it will not be ours anymore. They will twist it into something they can understand, something they can use." I knew she was right. The bards would sing of Helen the temptress, Helen the curse, Helen the cause of Troy's fall. They would call me the coward prince, the thief of another man's wife, the ruin of my people. They would leave out the nights when we lay awake listening to the wind in the olive trees, the mornings when the light through the palace windows seemed to hold the world. At peace, they would not speak of the way her hand fit in mine, or how her laughter felt like a promise the gods themselves could not break. In the days that followed, we landed in places where the name Troy was spoken like a warning, where doors closed at our approach, where the weight of what we carried was too heavy to share. Some offered shelter out of pity or greed, others turned us away. The war had left scars across the land, and our faces were etched into those wounds. At night, I dreamed of Hector, of Cassandra, of Priam standing on the steps of the palace, watching as the gates gave way. I saw the faces of soldiers I had fought beside, men whose names were now ash on the wind. In those dreams, Helen stood far away, her face hidden in shadow, and no matter how fast I ran, I could never reach her, but each morning, I would wake to find her there, beside me. Sometimes she would be awake already, watching the dawn creep across the sky. Sometimes she would still be sleeping, her breath slow and even, as if she had found a kind of peace I could not. Weeks turned to months, and still we drifted, our course uncertain. The gods had woven our fates together, but they had not promised us a destination, and perhaps that was the truest end to our story. Not death, not triumph, but the endless journey away from what we had destroyed. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Helen spoke again. Do you regret it? I thought of Troy, of its walls, its markets, its people. I thought of the laughter that once filled the streets, of Hector's steady hand on my shoulder, of Cassandra's dark eyes seeing too much. I thought of the fire, the screams, the betrayal that came hidden in a gift, and then I thought of the first moment I saw her, standing in the courtyard of the Spartan palace, her face turned toward the light. No, I said at last, I regret that the world could not bear what we were, but I do not regret you. She held my gaze for a long time, then looked away, her expression unreadable. Perhaps she believed me, perhaps she didn't, perhaps it didn't matter. The bards will tell you that love is a thing of joy, of triumph. But I have learned that it can also be a thing of ash, beautiful in the moment it burns, but leaving only cold in its wake. They will tell you that Helen was the cause of Troy's fall. They will tell you that I was the spark that lit the fire, but the truth is that Troy was already burning long before we ever met, and so we sail still, bound together by the choices we made, and by the ones we could never take back. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the world waits to decide what we were, lovers, fools, or simply the last survivors of a story the gods themselves could not forget. Stories are like rivers. They change as they flow, shaped by the lands they pass through and the voices that carry them. The tale of Helen and me has flowed for more than 3,000 years, bending through the tongues of poets, scholars, and kings, and yet, like the river source, the truth is often lost in the mist. Some will tell you that Helen was nothing more than a phantom, a shade set by the gods to stir men to war, while the real queen of Sparta lived quietly in Egypt. Others insist she was entirely more calculated than always ingeniously the wars of Troy, and yet the answer never comes. Perhaps there is none. Perhaps stories like and so, as I drift further from the shore of the past, I've come to see that the story was never truly mine alone. It belongs to every voice that has carried it across the centuries, to every hand that has shaped it anew. In one telling, I am a seducer, a thief in the night. In another, I am a fool, or worse, a coward, hiding behind walls, while braver men bled for my choice, and Helen. She shifts with each retelling, sometimes a victim, stolen from her home, sometimes a conspirator. Her beauty wielded like a blade, it is strange, living long enough to hear yourself turned into something you do not recognize, but perhaps that is the nature of legends. They feed on truth only until the truth no longer serves them. After that, they live on whatever keeps the fire burning in the minds of those who tell them. There are nights when the sea is calm and the stars spill like silver dust across the dark. On those nights, I imagine another life, one in which I never left Troy. For Sparta, one in which I never saw Helen in the lamplight of that palace courtyard. In that life, Troy still stands, Hector lives, and the names of Agamemnon and Achilles are just whispers from a far-off land. I imagine myself as a prince who became a king, with a wife chosen not by gods or fate, but by the quiet rhythms of ordinary life. But even in those imagined moments, there is an emptiness, a hollow where her face should be. I have learned that love, when it comes as ours did, does not ask what it will take. It simply takes. It strips you bare, demands your loyalty, your safety, your future, and you give it all willingly. It is only afterward, when the dust has settled, that you count the cost, and by then, the price is already paid. Perhaps that is why in every telling of this war, they return to her, not the walls that fell, not the ships that burned, not the kings who died, but to Helen, because in her lies the question no answer can satisfy, was it worth it? I do not know if history will ever forgive me. I do not know if it should, but I know this. When the last voice speaks our names, when the last fire dies out and the sea swallows the ruins of what we built, there will still be somewhere the echo of that first moment. Her eyes being mine, the world narrowing to a single breath, and the knowledge, dangerous, intoxicating, that nothing would ever be the same again. And perhaps that is enough, for kingdoms rise and fall, empires burn and fade, but a moment like that, it is eternal. Even the gods cannot touch it. In the years since, I have wandered more than I have stayed. No port feels like home, no land greets me as its own. We are welcome nowhere, for we carry the shadow of Troy with us, a shadow that precedes us like the warning cry of a bird before a storm. Sometimes I hear our names whispered on the wind. In markets and harbors, carried in voices that do not know I am near, they speak of the war as if it were a tale from another age. Yet in their eyes, I see the same hunger for beauty, the same awe at destruction that fed it in the beginning. Helen remains by my side, yet she is as untouchable as the moon's reflection on the sea. There are moments when she seems near enough to reach, when a smile passes between us that feels like sunlight breaking through cloud. And then there are days when she is distant, her thoughts turned inward, as though she walks the halls of memory alone. I wonder if she thinks of Sparta, of the life she left, or if she has learned, as I have, that there is no going back, not to a place, not to a time, not even to the person you once were, we have met. Those who fought in the war, survivors who carry their own scars, some look at us with hatred they can barely contain, others only with exhaustion, as if to say, it is over, let it rest, but wars do not rest, they live in the bones of those who remember, and in the songs of those who were not there. But wish they had been. There are nights when I wake and, for a moment, think I hear the distant clamor of battle, the clash of bronze, the roar of warriors, the groan of the city's gates under the battering of Greek rams. I sit up, my hand reaching for a bough that is no longer beside me, my heart racing until I hear only the steady breath of the sea. Sometimes I dream of returning, not to reclaim a throne, there is no throne left, but to stand among the ruins and feel the stones beneath my feet one last time, to kneel where Hector fell, to touch the earth where the palace stood, to offer a libation to the dead. Yet I know that even if I found the place, time will have made it strange to me. The grass will grow over the ashes, the sea will claim the harbor, and the wind will speak only in the language of the present, and still, the story will follow, the poets will not stop their singing, the scholars will not close their scrolls, they will keep shaping us into whatever they need, a cautionary tale, a tragedy, a romance, they will strip away the flesh and leave only the bones of what happened, polished and set on display for others to marvel at. But I remember the flesh, I remember the warmth of her hand in mine, as we fled under the cover of darkness, the way her voice trembled but did not break when she told me she would not turn back. I remember the quiet mornings in Troy before the war, when the air was cool and the markets hummed with the promise of another day. I remember the smell of the cedar beams in my chamber, the feel of the sea wind in my hair when we stood on the walls together. These are the pieces they will never no, these are the truths that will not fit into their verses, and perhaps that is why I speak them now, not to clear my name, not to plead my cause, but to remind anyone who listens that behind every legend there is a life, behind every myth there is a heartbeat, fragile and fleeting, trying to hold on to something before the tide takes it away. The tide always takes it away. If you have listened this far, perhaps you are searching for the truth, perhaps you want to know if the war was worth it, if the love was real, if the stories they tell have any seed of what truly happened. I cannot give you the answer you expect. The truth is not a clean blade, it is jagged, rusted, and it cuts the one who tries to grasp it. Yes, I loved her, that is the one thing no song, no scroll, no whisper can take from me. I loved her in Sparta, in Troy, on the sea, and even now in this drifting exile. But love is not a shield, it does not stop arrows or quench the flames of a burning city, it does not silence the cries of the dying or rebuild the walls torn down by betrayal. Sometimes I wonder if the gods chose us, not to bless, but to test, to see how much too